He thought he was an orphan with nothing to his name. But on his 18th birthday, a key and a deed to a forgotten farm would unravel a secret his father died to protect. What he discovered in the dust and silence of that old house wasn't just about the past. It was about who he was going to become. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, like your story hadn't been written yet, then you'll understand this journey. Stick with me, and if this resonates, consider subscribing. We talk about the hard stuff here, the things that shape us. The air in the administrative office of the St. Jude's Home for Boys always smelled the same. Lemon-scented disinfectant, old paper, and the faint, sad odor of resignation. For 10 years, that smell had been the backdrop to my life. It was the smell of being a ward of the state, a file in a cabinet, a problem to be managed until the clock ran out. And on this cold, gray October morning, the clock had finally run out. It was my 18th birthday. I was, in the eyes of the law, a man. In my own eyes, I was just done. Done with the dormitories, the scheduled meals, the well-meaning but weary-eyed counselors. Done with being Leo, file number 734. Mrs. Gable, the facility director, sat across from me at her large metal desk. She had a kind face, etched with the lines of 1,000 other goodbyes just like this one. She slid a thin manila envelope across the desk. Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, and $300 in cash, the state's parting gift. A severance package for a childhood I never really had. "This is it, Leo," she said, her voice gentle but firm. The same tone she used when breaking up a fight or announcing bad news. "You have a spot at the transitional housing shelter downtown. They'll help you with job applications, getting your ID." I nodded, not really listening. I'd heard the speech a dozen times, given to the boys who aged out before me. It was a well-rehearsed set of instructions for a life I couldn't imagine. The shelter, a minimum wage job, a tiny, lonely apartment if I was lucky. The path was worn so smooth by the boys before me that it felt less like a future and more like a groove I was destined to fall into. I stared at the envelope. My entire existence, documented and paid off, felt impossibly light. "There is one other thing," Mrs. Gable said, breaking the silence. Her professional calm seemed to waver for a fraction of a second. She hesitated, pulling a small, tarnished cardboard box from her top drawer. It was about the size of a shoebox, tied with faded twine. It looked ancient. "This was left for you. It's been in our records vault since you were admitted." I stared at it. In all my years at St. Jude's, no one had ever mentioned a box. No one had ever mentioned anything from before. My life, as far as I knew, had begun the day I was found, a scared 8-year-old, sleeping in the back of a bus at the city depot. The police report said, abandoned, no note, no name, just a tag on my jacket that read Leo everything before that was a blur of hazy, disconnected images I couldn't trust. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's from your father," she said softly. The words hit me like a physical blow. My father. I had a father. I'd spent a decade convincing myself I was a product of immaculate conception. A boy who'd simply appeared because the alternative that someone had created me and then discarded me was too painful to hold on to. I'd grieved for parents I couldn't remember, and then, slowly, I'd buried them. And now, here he was, resurrected in a dusty cardboard box. "He passed away shortly after you came into the system," Mrs. Gable continued, filling the void of my shock. "His name was Samuel Cole. According to the file, he established a small trust to be held until your 18th birthday. This box and the contents of the trust were to be given to you today. There's a lawyer you need to see. His address is in here." My hands were trembling as I reached for the box. The twine was brittle, and it crumbled under my fingers. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was ornate and rusted, the kind of key you see in old movies, the kind that opens a castle or a treasure chest. Beneath it was a sealed envelope with my name, Leo Cole, written in a strong, slanted hand. Cole. My name was Leo Cole. For the first time, I felt the shape of it in my mouth, a name that connected me to someone. To a father. A dead father. I didn't open the letter. Couldn't. Not there. Not in that office that smelled of endings. I clutched the box and the manila envelope, my two competing inheritances. One from the state, a map to a life of managed poverty. The other from a ghost, a key to a place I couldn't imagine. Mrs. Gable stood up, signaling our time was over. She gave me a brief, awkward hug. "Good luck, Leo," she said. "Be smart. Be safe." I walked out of her office and down the long, echoing hallway for the last time. The other boys watched me, their faces a mixture of envy and fear. I was free. But free to do what? Free to be who? I walked out the heavy front doors of St. Jude's, the cold October air hitting my face. The city noise was a roar in my ears after the institutional quiet. I had $300, a spot in a shelter I didn't want, and a key from a dead man I never knew. I felt more alone than I ever had inside. I found the nearest bus stop, sat down on the cold plastic bench, and for the first time, I looked at the address on the envelope from the box. It wasn't in the city. It was for a place called Oakhaven, a town I'd never heard of, hundreds of miles away. A decision took root in my heart, a reckless, desperate seed of hope. I wasn't going to the shelter. I was going to Oakhaven. I was going to find out what that key unlocked. The bus ride to Oakhaven was a journey through a world I'd only ever seen in pictures. The concrete sprawl of the city slowly gave way to suburbs, then to stretches of highway flanked by thinning forests. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light outside the grimy window. I kept my hand on the box in my lap, the solid weight of the key a strange and constant comfort. I was Leo Cole. The name felt like a new coat, ill-fitting and strange, but mine. I wondered about him, Samuel Cole. What was his face like? Did he have my dark, unruly hair? My gray eyes? Did he ever think of me in the years after he left me? The questions were a swarm in my head, buzzing with a decade of suppressed longing. My life at St. Jude's had been defined by its lack of history. We were all blank slates, kids whose pasts were erased or redacted. We learned not to ask questions because the answers were either absent or too painful to hear. We learned to live in the present, a relentless, unchanging cycle of bells and rules. Now suddenly I had a past. It was locked in an envelope and represented by a key. But it was there. It was real. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time, I had a direction that wasn't chosen for me. I was moving towards something, not just away from something else. The bus finally pulled into Oakhaven in the late afternoon. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road. A single main street was lined with brick buildings from another century, their facades bearing the faded names of businesses long gone. There was a diner with a flickering neon sign, a general store, a post office, and not much else. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, a stark contrast to the city's exhaust fumes. It was quiet, so quiet I could hear the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. A handful of people got off the bus with me, greeting each other with familiar nods. They all looked at me, the stranger in a thin jacket with a cardboard box, and then quickly looked away. I was an outsider, an anomaly in their small, ordered world. The lawyer's office, according to the address, was in one of the old brick buildings, above the hardware store. The sign on the door was simple: Arthur Abernathy, attorney at law. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the stillness. The office was small and cluttered, filled with towering stacks of books and files that seemed to defy gravity. A man who I presumed was Mr. Abernathy sat behind a massive oak desk. He was older, with a shock of white hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as I entered, his expression neutral, almost bored. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dry as dust. "I'm Leo Cole," I said, my voice catching. It was the first time I'd said the name to a stranger. His eyes sharpened. The boredom vanished, replaced by a flicker of something else. Pity, maybe, or just professional interest. He gestured to the worn leather chair in front of his desk. "I've been expecting you," he said, his tone softening slightly. Your social worker called ahead.
I'm Arthur Abernathy.
I was your father's lawyer. He pulled a thick file from a drawer, the cover labeled Cole, Samuel. He opened it. And for a few moments, the only sound was the rustling of paper. I sat there, my hands gripping the arms of the chair, feeling like a defendant awaiting a verdict. Finally, he looked at me over the top of his glasses.
All right, son.
Let's get to it. He began, his voice all business now. Your father, Samuel Cole, passed away 10 years ago. He left his entire estate in a trust for you, to be administered by my office until you came of age. Which you have. Congratulations, by the way. He didn't smile. The estate consists of one primary asset, a 90-acre farm just north of town. The property includes a farmhouse, a barn, and several outbuildings. A farm. I had a farm. The words didn't compute. I'd grown up surrounded by concrete and chain-link fences. The only dirt I knew was in the sad, patchy lawn behind the dormitory. 90 acres was an amount of space I couldn't even comprehend. However, Mr. Abernathy continued, and I knew from his tone that this was the important part. The property is not unencumbered. Your father took out a significant mortgage against it years ago. The loan has been in deferment, but now that the trust is being dissolved, the payments are due. There is a substantial amount of back taxes owed as well. To put it plainly, the farm is deeply in debt. My heart sank. Of course it was. Nothing could be simple. Nothing could be clean. Now, there is an interested party, he went on, pulling another, newer-looking folder from the stack. A development corporation, Viridian Holdings, has been buying up land in this county for the past few years. They've made a standing offer to purchase the Cole property. A very generous offer, in fact. It would be more than enough to settle all the debts, the back taxes, my legal fees, and leave you with a considerable sum of money. Enough to get a real start in life. An apartment, a car, college, whatever you want. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a formal offer letter from Viridian Holdings. I looked at the number at the bottom, and my breath caught in my throat. It was more money than I had ever imagined. It was a ticket out. A ticket to a life where I wouldn't have to worry about where my next meal was coming from, where I wouldn't have to sleep in a shelter. It was the easy answer, the smart answer. Most people in your position would take the offer, son, Mr. Abernathy said, watching my face. It's a clean break, a fresh start. The farm, it hasn't been worked in 10 years. The house has been empty. It would take a lot of work, a lot of money, just to make it habitable. Money you don't have. I looked down at the box in my lap at the iron key. The farm. My father's farm. Place that was mine. The money on the paper was an abstract concept. A string of zeros. But the key was real. The land was real. For the first time in my life, I had a connection to a piece of the earth. What if I don't want to sell? I asked, the question surprising me as much as it seemed to surprise him. Mr. Abernathy leaned back in his chair, studying me. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Well, he said slowly, then you've got a hell of a fight on your hands. The bank will want its money. The county will want its taxes. Viridian will not be happy. But the property is legally yours. The choice is yours to make. He reached into his desk again and pulled out another key. This one a modern car key with a small plastic fob. Your father's truck is parked out back. Sold, but it runs. Part of the estate. And this, he said, pushing the thick envelope from my box toward me, is for you. He left specific instructions that you were to receive it here at my desk on your 18th birthday. He also gave me a map of the county with a circle drawn in red ink. The farm is here. It's about a 5-mile drive. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I had a name. I had a truck. I had a farm. And I had a choice. I took the keys and the map, my mind reeling. The offer from Viridian felt like a siren's call, promising safety and security. But the old iron key in my pocket felt like a promise of something else. Something more important. Something like home. As I walked out of his office, Mr. Abernathy called after me. Leo, he said. I turned. Read the letter. Your father was a complicated man. But he loved you. Don't ever doubt that. The truck was an old, beat-up Ford. Its blue paint faded and chipped, with a fine layer of dust covering it from years of disuse. It smelled of oil and stale coffee inside. But when I turned the key in the ignition, the engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with a surprising vitality. I felt a strange sense of connection sitting in that driver's seat. Had my father's hands held this same steering wheel? Had he listened to this same crackly radio? I followed the simple map Mr. Abernathy had given me, driving out of the small town and onto a winding country road. The trees grew thicker here, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The late afternoon sun slanted through the leaves, painting the road in stripes of gold and shadow. After a few miles, I saw it. A rusted, wrought-iron gate hanging crooked on one hinge, and beyond it, a gravel lane so overgrown with weeds it was barely visible. A weathered wooden sign, half hidden by ivy, read Coal Farms. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I turned the truck onto the lane, the tires crunching over gravel and snapping dry twigs. The lane opened up into a clearing, and there it was. The farmhouse. It was a simple two-story wooden house that had once been white, but was now a peeling, weathered gray. The porch sagged in the middle, and a few shutters hung at odd angles like tired eyelids. To the left stood a large red barn, its paint faded to a dull rust color, one of its great doors slightly ajar, revealing a dark interior. The fields beyond were a sea of tall, brown grass, choked with weeds and saplings. The whole place looked asleep, neglected and forgotten, but not ruined. It was breathing, quietly waiting. I parked the truck and got out, the silence pressing in on me. There was no city hum, no distant sirens, just the sound of the wind whispering through the tall grass and the creak of a loose shutter. It should have felt desolate, but it didn't. Felt peaceful. I walked up the creaking steps to the front porch, my boots kicking up clouds of dust. I pulled the old iron key from my pocket. Felt heavy and important in my hand. I slid it into the lock on the front door. It resisted at first, stiff from disuse, but with a firm twist. I felt the tumblers give way with a satisfying clunk. The sound echoed in the stillness. I pushed the door open. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me. The scent of old wood, dust, and something else, something faintly sweet, like dried herbs. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in thick, golden shafts. The entryway opened into a living room. The furniture, a simple sofa, a couple of armchairs, a wooden coffee table, was all covered in white sheets, making them look like a family of ghosts. A stone fireplace stood against one wall, its hearth cold and black. To my right was a staircase leading to the second floor. To my left, a doorway led into what I assumed was the kitchen. I walked through the house like a trespasser, my footsteps loud on the wooden floors. Everything was neat, orderly, but coated in a decade's worth of dust. It was as if someone had carefully prepared the house for a long absence, expecting to return. In the kitchen, a thick layer of dust covered the countertops and the simple wooden table in the center of the room. A calendar on the wall was still turned to October, 10 years ago, the last day of my father's life. The sight sent a chill through me. On that table, placed squarely in the center as if waiting for me, was another envelope. It was identical to the one Mr. Abernathy had given me, with Leo written on it in the same strong hand. My hands shook as I picked it up. This one felt different. It felt like it had been left here, in this house, specifically for me to find. I sat down at the dusty table, the chair groaning in protest. I took a deep breath and I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper. The ink was slightly faded, but the handwriting was clear. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, that you have turned 18, a man, and second, that I am not there to see it. For that, I am more sorry than words can ever say. I know you must have 1,000 questions. You must hate me. I understand. I deserve it. You deserve answers. I can't give you all of them, not in one letter. But I can start. This house, this land, this is your home. It has been in our family for generations. It is in your blood, even if you don't feel it yet. I know it doesn't look like much right now. I know you've been told about the debt. I know there will be people who tell you to sell it, to take the money and run. They will tell you it's the smart thing to do. And maybe it is. But I am asking you not to. Not yet. I am asking you for a little bit of faith. I made some terrible mistakes, son. I got involved with people I shouldn't have, all for what I thought were the right reasons. I was trying to save this farm, trying to save your mother. I failed at both. In the end, the only thing I could save was you. Leaving you at that bus station was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was the only way I knew to break the chain, to keep them from finding you, to give you a chance at a life they couldn't touch. I erased myself from your life so you could have 1 inch. I know this is not enough, but it's a start. There is more to the story. You will find it here in this house. This place holds all my secrets. Look in the heart of the home where the fire burns. What is built to last? You are my son. You are a coal. You are stronger than you think. Whatever you choose to do, know that I loved you. I have always loved you. Your father, Samuel. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. He didn't abandon me. He protected me. The story I had told myself for 10 years, the story of being unwanted, of being thrown away, was a lie. It was a brutal, painful act of love. The anger and resentment I had harbored for a nameless, faceless parent began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, aching grief for a man I never got to know. He had seen me even from a distance. He had planned for this day. He had left me a home, a history, and a puzzle to solve. The heart of the home, where the fire burns, the fireplace in the living room. What is built to last? Stone. The stone fireplace. I walked back into the living room and knelt before the hearth. The stones were thick and uneven, covered in soot. I ran my hands over them, feeling for anything unusual. My fingers brushed against one stone, near the bottom, that felt slightly loose. I pushed at it. It didn't move. I pushed harder, wedging my fingers into the crack around it. With a low scraping sound, the stone shifted. It wasn't just a stone. It was the face of a small, hidden compartment. My heart pounded. I pulled the stone out and reached into the dark cavity behind it. My fingers closed around a cold, metal box. This is the point in the story where everything changes. It's the moment the ground shifts beneath your feet, and you realize the world isn't what you thought it was. Have you ever had a moment like that? A revelation that rewrites your entire past? It's a lonely, terrifying feeling, but it's also where real growth begins. If you're going through something similar, or if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, this channel, is for people who have faced the fire and are finding their way through. Let me know in the comments if this is hitting home for you. Your stories matter. Now, let's get back to that farmhouse and the secrets hidden in the stone. The metal box was heavy and locked with a small, simple padlock. I looked around the room, my eyes landing on a set of iron pokers next to the fireplace. I grabbed the thinnest one, wedged the tip into the shackle of the lock, and twisted. With a sharp crack, the cheap metal gave way. I lifted the lid of the box. It was filled to the brim. On top was a stack of letters, tied with the same kind of twine that had been on the outer box. Beneath them was a thick, leather-bound ledger, a small stack of photographs held together with a rubber band, and at the very bottom, bundles of cash. Old, worn bills wrapped in paper bands. I didn't count it, but it looked like a lot. More than I'd ever seen in my life. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely untie the twine on the letters. There were at least a dozen of them, all addressed to me, all in my father's hand. They weren't dated. I pulled the first one from the top of the stack and unfolded it. Leo, it began. If you found this, you're more resourceful than I gave you credit for. Or maybe just more stubborn. Both are Cole family traits. I'm writing these letters not knowing if you'll ever read them, but I have to believe you will. I need you to know the whole truth. Not just the part that makes me sound like some kind of tragic hero. The real, ugly truth. I sat down on the floor in front of the cold fireplace and began to read. For the next several hours, the world outside the dusty farmhouse ceased to exist. The sun set, plunging the room into shadow, but I barely noticed. I read letter after letter, and with each one, the ghost of Samuel Cole became a living, breathing, flawed man. He told me about his life. He wrote about growing up on this farm, about the smell of the hayfields after a rain, about the satisfaction of working the land with his own 2 hands. He wrote about my mother, Sarah. He described her with a love so fierce and tender it made my chest ache. He wrote about how she'd love to paint, how she would set up her easel in the fields and capture the changing light. He wrote about how happy they were when they found out she was pregnant with me. The photographs in the box corresponded with the stories. There was one of him, a young man with my same dark hair and a wide, easy smile, his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. My mother. There was another of them standing on the porch of this very house, her belly swollen. Me. And there was one of a newborn baby, me again, wrapped in a blanket, being held in my father's strong arms. He was looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated love. Seeing that look, seeing the proof of his love, broke something open inside me. The deep, hardened knot of abandonment I had carried for a decade finally began to unravel. But the story took a dark turn. My mother got sick after I was born. A rare form of cancer, aggressive and expensive to treat. The farm's insurance was minimal. Samuel, desperate, started selling off equipment, then parcels of land. But it wasn't enough. The medical bills piled up into a mountain of debt. That's when he made his mistake. He wrote about a man named Marcus Thorne, a charismatic but ruthless man who offered him a solution. Thorne ran a loan sharking operation disguised as an investment company. He gave my father the money he needed for my mother's treatments, but the interest rates were criminal. Samuel was trapped. The ledger in the box detailed every transaction. The initial loan, the impossible interest payments, the penalties. It was a chronicle of a man slowly being bled dry. My mother passed away when I was 5. Samuel was left with a broken heart, a mountain of debt to a dangerous man, and a young son to raise. Thorne's collectors started coming around, their threats becoming less and less veiled. They didn't just want the money. They wanted the farm. Thorne, it turned out, was an early front for what would become Viridian Holdings. They were playing a long game, using debt to force farmers off their land. My father knew he couldn't protect me and fight them at the same time. They had started watching the house, following him. He was terrified they would use me to get to him. The final letters were frantic, written in the last days before he left me. He described his plan with chilling clarity. He would make it look like he had buckled under the pressure and abandoned me. He would create a paper trail showing he'd run off, leaving everything behind. Then he would disappear, leading Thorne and his men away from Oakhaven, away from me. He knew it was a suicide mission. He wrote that he was going to expose them, to take evidence of their predatory lending practices to the authorities in the city. The last letter was unfinished. It ended mid-sentence. No matter what happens, live a good life, Leo. Be a better man than I was. This land is your birthright. Don't let them. He never finished the thought. I knew what had happened. They had caught up with him before he could get to the police. They had killed him, and they had gotten away with it. The official story, the one Mrs. Gable had told me, was that he'd passed away. It was cleaner that way. No one had to look too closely. I sat there in the dark, the letters spread around me, the full weight of my father's sacrifice crashing down on me. He hadn't just given me up. He had died for me. He had orchestrated his own disappearance and death to buy me 10 years of safety. The debt on the farm wasn't just a mortgage. It was blood money. And Viridian Holdings wasn't just a development company. They were murderers, patiently waiting to collect on the property of the man they had eliminated. The money in the box, he explained in one of the letters, was every last dollar he could pull together in cash. It was for me, a survival kit, enough to run if that's what I chose to do, or enough to stay and fight. The quiet of the house was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the presence of the past, with unspoken grief and unresolved violence. The generous offer from Viridian wasn't generous at all. It was the final insult. They wanted to buy my father's legacy, his grave, with their blood money, and I was the one they expected to sign the deed. The choice Mr. Abernathy had laid out for me was no longer a simple financial decision. It was a moral one. Could I take money from the people who had destroyed my family? Could I let them pave over this land, this last piece of my father, and build their soulless housing developments? Or did I owe it to him to stand my ground, to finish the fight he had started? I was 18 years old. I had nothing but a rusty truck, a house that was falling down, and a box of secrets. I was terrified, but for the first time in my life, I knew who I was. I was Samuel Cole's son, and they were not getting his farm. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold on the living room floor, the first rays of dawn filtering through the dirty windows. The letters were still scattered around me. The reality of what I had learned hadn't softened overnight. It had solidified into a hard, cold knot of anger and resolve in my stomach. The fear was still there, a low thrum beneath the surface, but the determination was stronger. I gathered the letters and the ledger, placing them carefully back in the metal box. I hid the box back in its stone compartment, along with most of the cash, keeping only a few $100s for immediate needs. This house was no longer just a shelter. It was an archive, a fortress. It was my father's last stand, and it was about to become mine. My first stop was the general store in Oakhaven. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as I entered. An older woman with a kind, wrinkled face looked up from behind the counter. "Help you, Han?" she asked. I bought a bucket, sponges, cleaning supplies, a box of trash bags, and some basic food: bread, peanut butter, milk. It felt strange to be buying things for a home, for a kitchen I could call my own. The woman, whose name tag read Martha, watched me with open curiosity. "You the boy staying out at the old Cole place?" she asked. News traveled fast in a town this small. I nodded. "Yep, that's me." A shadow of sadness crossed her face. "We were all so sorry to hear about Samuel. He was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "You watch out for those Viridian people. They've been sniffing around that property for years. They don't take no for an answer." It was a warning, but it was also an affirmation. Someone else knew. Someone else remembered. It made me feel a little less alone. "Thanks," I said. "I'll be careful." Back at the farm, I started to work. I began in the kitchen, the heart of the house. I filled the bucket with water from the hand pump at the sink. Miraculously, it still worked, pulling up cold, clear water from the well. I scrubbed away a decade of dust and grime from the counters, the floors, the table. With every swipe of the sponge, I felt like I was not just cleaning a room, but reclaiming it. I was erasing the neglect, the sadness, the years of emptiness. The physical labor was grounding. It kept my mind from spinning out of control with fear and what-ifs. As I worked, the house slowly began to transform. The smell of dust and decay was replaced by the clean scent of soap and lemon oil. The afternoon sun, shining through the now clean kitchen window, seemed warmer, more hopeful. Later that day, a sleek, expensive-looking car I didn't recognize drove slowly down the lane and parked behind my father's truck. A man in a sharp suit got out. He was tall, with slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He walked up to the porch where I was sweeping. "Leo Cole?" he asked, his voice smooth and polished. I nodded, my hand tightening on the broom handle. "My name is Robert Jennings. I'm with Viridian Holdings," he said, extending a hand. I didn't take it. "I just wanted to stop by and personally welcome you to Oakhaven. We're very excited about the potential for this area. Our offer for this property still stands, of course. In fact, seeing the state of the place, we might even be willing to increase it, just to help you get on your feet." His words were coated in a thick layer of fake sympathy. He was looking at the peeling paint and the sagging porch, seeing only a problem that money could solve. He had no idea he was standing on consecrated ground. a place bought and paid for with a good man's life. He was the enemy, standing right on my doorstep. "The farm's not for sale," I said, my voice steady, surprising myself. His smile tightened. "Mr. Cole, let's be practical. This is a lot of property for a young man to handle. The debts, the taxes, they're significant. Our offer is a lifeline." It's the smart play. He used the same words as my father's letter, the same words as Mr. Abernathy. The smart play. "I'm not interested," I repeated, turning my back on him and going back to my sweeping. I could feel his eyes on my back. After a long moment, he said, "The offer is on the table until the end of the week. After that, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings." Think it over. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. The confrontation left me shaken but also strangely energized. The threat was no longer an abstract concept in a letter. It had a face and a name, and I had faced it. I hadn't backed down. That night, I made my first real meal in my own home. I ate peanut butter sandwiches at the clean kitchen table and read my father's letters again. Not for information this time, but for strength. His voice, his words, were a comfort in the vast, quiet darkness of the house. The next day, I went to see Mr. Abernathy. I walked into his office with a new sense of purpose. He looked up, a question in his eyes. "I'm not selling," I said before he could even speak. "I'm going to keep the farm." I told him everything. I told him about the letters, the ledger, the man who called himself Marcus Thorne, and the connection to Viridian Holdings. I told him I believed they had killed my father. He listened intently, his expression growing more and more grim. When I was finished, he was silent for a long time, looking at the file on his desk as if seeing it for the first time. "I knew Samuel was in trouble," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "He was a proud man. He wouldn't let me help him. He told me he had a plan to get clear, but he never told me the details. I always suspected Thorne was behind his disappearance, but I could never prove it. The local sheriff at the time, let's just say he was friendly with Thorne's associates. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new respect. This ledger, these letters, this is what I never had. It's not enough to open a murder investigation after 10 years, not without a body. But it might be enough to fight Viridian in civil court. We can argue the debt is illegitimate, the product of criminal conspiracy. It's a long shot, Leo. A very long shot. And it will be expensive. I have some money, I said, thinking of the cash in the metal box. My father left it for me. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly.
All right, son.
If you're determined to do this, I'm with you. First things first, we need to deal with the bank and the county. We'll use some of that money to pay the most urgent back taxes and make a good faith payment on the mortgage. That will stop any immediate foreclosure action and buy us time. Then, we file a countersuit against Viridian. He started pulling books from his shelves. His energy transformed. He was no longer just a tired, small-town lawyer. He was a man with a cause. For the first time, I had an ally. The next few months were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The legal battle began, a slow, grinding process of paperwork and procedures. Mr. Abernathy handled the letters from Viridian's high-priced lawyers, shielding me from the worst of their threats and intimidation tactics. My job was the farm. I used my father's money sparingly, buying only what was absolutely necessary. Tools, seeds, fuel for the ancient tractor I found in the barn. I spent my days from sunrise to sunset in the fields. I learned how to repair the tractor from old manuals I found in the workshop. I spent weeks clearing the overgrown fields, pulling up weeds and saplings, tilling the soil until my hands were raw and my back ached constantly. It was brutal, lonely work. There were days I was so exhausted and overwhelmed I just sat in the middle of a half-plowed field and cried, certain I had made a terrible mistake. But then I would look back at the farmhouse, standing solid and patient on the hill, and I would think of my father. I was working the same land he had worked. I was touching the same soil. Every stone I pulled from the ground, every furrow I plowed, felt like an act of devotion, a way of connecting with him across the years. I wasn't just fixing a farm. I was rebuilding a life, both his and mine. The community in Oakhaven, initially wary of me, began to watch my progress. One day, an old farmer named Hank, who owned the adjacent property, stopped his truck by my fence line. He watched me struggle with the tractor for a few minutes, then got out and showed me how to fix the clutch. He didn't say much, but the next day he left a box of spare parts on my porch. Martha, from the general store, started packing an extra sandwich in my grocery bag. These small acts of kindness were lifelines. They made me feel like I was becoming part of the place, not just an occupant. I was no longer just Leo Cole, the orphan. I was becoming Leo Cole, the farmer. One evening, exhausted after a long day, I was cleaning out the last corner of the barn. I found an old wooden crate tucked away under a pile of rotting tarps. Inside, covered in dust, was a set of canvases and a box of oil paints. My mother's. I pulled out one of the canvases. It was a painting of the farm, a view from the hill behind the house, bathed in the golden light of a sunset. The fields were green and healthy, the farmhouse pristine. It was a vision of the farm not as it was, but as it could be, as it should be. It was a painting of hope. Holding it, I felt the presence of both my parents more strongly than ever before. They weren't just ghosts in a tragic story. They were a part of this land, a part of me. The legal battle with Viridian dragged on. Their lawyers filed motion after motion to have our case dismissed. They painted my father as a deadbeat who had abandoned his debts and his son. They painted me as a foolish, sentimental kid being manipulated by a small-town lawyer. But Mr. Abernathy was relentless. He used the ledger to show a clear pattern of predatory lending. He found other farmers in the county who had been ruined by Thorne's company. A few, emboldened by my fight, agreed to testify. The tide was slowly, painstakingly, beginning to turn. We were no longer just defending a farm. We were exposing a corrupt system. The fight is far from over. There is no guarantee we will win. Viridian is a corporate giant, and we are just one small farm. But something has changed in me. I came to Oakhaven a boy with nothing, defined by what I had lost. Now I am a man defined by what I am willing to fight for. This farm is more than just land and buildings. It's a legacy of love and sacrifice. It's the place where I found my father and, in doing so, found myself. It's the first place I have ever truly felt at home. The work is hard. The future is uncertain. But when I stand on the porch and look out over the fields I have cleared with my own hands, I feel a sense of peace I have never known. I am no longer a blank slate. My story is written here in this soil. Inheritance isn't always about money or property. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can be left with is a story that gives you a reason to stand up and fight. It's the knowledge that you come from a line of people who were stubborn, who loved fiercely, and who believed in something enough to die for it. My father gave me that. He gave me a home, not by providing a safe and easy life, but by leaving me a difficult and meaningful choice. And in making that choice, in choosing to stay, to fight, to build, I have finally honored his sacrifice. I have become his son. This journey has taught me that home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you build, a place you defend. It's about putting down roots, even in the hardest ground, and choosing to grow. For anyone out there who feels lost, who feels like their story is over before it's even begun, I want you to know this. Your true inheritance might be waiting for you in the most unexpected place. It might be a difficult choice, a forgotten story, or a fight that everyone tells you is impossible to win. Don't be afraid of it. That is where you will find out who you really are. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, please subscribe to the channel. This is a community for people who understand that the deepest roots often grow from the rockiest soil. Share your own story of finding home in the comments below. I read every one. You are not alone.